No, I ran away. You will go like, oh, yes. Then I ran out. And I came back. I'm not looking for. That was good to see.
Yes, I was actually planning to do that. Like that. What happened yesterday? Last night.
My room is nice. Yeah. So hi everyone. This room is being live streamed. So if anyone has any violent objections to being live streamed, please sound out now, especially the.
Please, my face will be inside.
If you have violent objections, say now.
Yeah, no, serious.
Never mind.
Yeah.
I think my father also.
And
Can
Abby just
What's going on now?
Everyone. Things happen.
This is a painful video.
S&T, man.
how come your thumbs are so small?
She did
Thank you.
So you need brightness. Sorry, the level of conversation we have just gone.
I got new things.
Yeah, it's
Oh my god.
I live from the other side.
Because there was toilet. Right? Right here. Right here.
Are you judging me too?
Why?
Yeah. I was be like, for the third person.
Still Who's talking about your young sister judge? No,
So Ashish will judge.
But actually, it's complicated.
How come?
we were teammates.
Oh, I don't know why the qualified third judge will walk in is complicated.
But I think there are too many conflicts that cannot.
You know, I basically declared all my conflicts up front, and the instances are not legitimate, but other people object. Okay, but if it's Ashish,
But because is there anyone that can
it's
judge?
really new.
Incredible, it's an amazing game you recognize of conflict. Because then suddenly,
Okay, openly declare. I used to like this guy, so.
It's fine.
Mr. What?
Ashish is objective enough to not.
Okay, okay. I used to go with him.
I don't know.
It's okay. Just be clear.
That is amazing. Why he gave, like that must have been some friendship. That must have been some team that's the reason why he just gave you away.
No.
Yeah, that's what we're okay with. Like that's why. Man, that partnership must have really left an impression.
I give you the stink eye.
Right, let's call this house to order, but before anything else, gender pronoun preference.
No preference.
No preference.
They for the leader of opposition. He or they. Deputy leader of opposition.
She or they propose.
Yeah. Sharon, she, Debashi.
Alright, okay. So to start this debate, let's invite the Prime Minister to close the topic.
Yeah.
Fine though.
There's no really camera around.
Okay, good luck, guys. Because we regret the notion that people often associate high culture with the way it has been phrased. Because the term itself has been rather condescending in the first place. People believe that, and we acknowledge, and people often believe that high culture often refers to some forms of art house culture, which often draws from a mostly canon, a mostly Western canon. But we'll be happy on the side of OG to open up this to niche canons. So we'll see that each country will be able to purport their own culture. Japan will be promoting their own kabuki dance, and Korea will be promoting their own sort of Shila dance. So we think in the alternative, we ought to consider what mass culture is. Mass culture often is one with an ample viewership, and with an ample financial backing, and it's often popular to begin with. It's predominantly controlled by an almost certainly Western canon or big corporations. Certainly you see things like Korean dramas here and there, but this falls in the minimum. So we think on the contrast, high culture tends to be more niche, tends to be more dated, and it tends to push on the boundaries of what we think is art and what we think is the sum of all human experiences combined. But we think that while it's no less valid, it's difficult for high culture to survive because it just for some historical failures or otherwise, it just doesn't have its ability to become financially sustainable. It means firstly being able to project yourself to a large group of people where you ordinarily can't do it, and it also requires a lot of training where popular culture is able to do so much more better than they are in the first place. So what we're happy to do in our debate today, we're happy to set a quota of around 50% of airtime of television shows to culture, and if not, we'll cut the licenses for these television programs to broadcast on TV. Of course, we think that mass culture can still be consumed on YouTube, but the point is this: we want to encourage people to consume more forms of high culture, and we think that this is the best means for ensuring that the art scene will be diversified in the future. 3 questions I'll be talking about in my speech today. First, why does subjective value in high culture even if people don't like it? Second, why the state has duty to intervene in these cases above and all other means? And third, why we bring more good than harm to the creative scene, why we bring more good to the creative scene in our policy. First question, why does an objective value in high culture even if people don't like it? We think there's a value when we do things like offering literature in schools, even if the schools don't popularize it. We think there's a value in being able to draw to our own past, because it's the historical basis of how things to be. And it's upon this cultural repository that you are able to ensure and identify your own human heritage, not just how things are, but how things came to be, and that's part of your own human actualization. We believe in the modern context, we allow people to recognize that you are able to engage in people and with conversations with other people on the basis, on no basis of language, race, or religion, or gender, ultimately because we feel that each other person has an inherent value worth discussing with. So we think that to the extent that we want other people to be able to freely engage with others, we ought to ensure that you are able to freely engage with the past. So we think the value of high culture is this: you ensure that when you have airtime, this high culture groups are able to remain sustainability viable, and this prevents these people from dying out. It prevents people from not taking learning unique musical instruments, ultimately because they feel that there's no inherent value in doing it anymore, or taking on certain kinds of crafts like katana making, because this is considered to be lowbrow and not sustainable. So we think that ultimately, if you don't voice this sort of culture and you don't bring it to the limelight and you don't have the financial largesse to ensure that it survives, this like culture will eventually die out, and this cultural groups will die, and you are essentially creating some sort of cultural void in the world where one used to exist, and one where you know used to exist because you know you have a history, but you are now unable to access it anymore. Second question: why the state has a duty to intervene, and why museums in these instances are not enough? No, thank you, sir. We think that we have an incentive to ensure a burgeoning art scene in every country. We think that museums are a wash because no one goes there anymore, and it's bigger for us to discuss it in those cases. We think that the notice of high art is important because for a state, because it tends to link to the ideas of civil society, because high art forms tend to engage with certain things like critical discourse, the ability for you to engage with certain countries, to engage with certain ideas, like how Tchaikovsky used opera, even in the 18th century, to engage with certain things like how the Russian government was doing at certain times. If they are able to tie the professionalism in their strict learning with the thoroughness in the ability to criticize issues in a way that mass culture people like Katy Perry are often unable to do so, we think that's better on our side, and we want to preserve that sort of thing and ensure that there's enough airtime. No, thank you, sir. So we think that if the states want to hold critical mirror to itself, to be able to ensure that the people are able to engage with the state, it's important. We think there's a problem when people are not voting in American society, ultimately because they don't think they're empowered with the moral agency to vote. And we think that we increase that on our side if we are able to believe, allow them to believe that they are able to think in the manner that these artists are able to think, more than just consuming things like Nicki Minaj. So let's contrast that with mass culture. Yes, closing.
All of these benefits are great. What you need to tell me is that why putting them on primetime TV will create these benefits.
We think that primetime TV is it's a good in itself because people tend to consume it already. Because people are not, because it's a lot easier to access than perhaps going to a theater to watch opera and the likes of that. But we put to you that even more people are drawn away from the television and want to go on YouTube right now. We think there's a high chance that people will watch these sorts of art forms, and there's a higher chance that there's higher marginal benefit in your ability for these art forms to survive in the first place. Let's talk a bit about mass culture, and that there's a lot of private investment in the first place. We don't think that to the extent that big conglomerates like Disney, which are incredibly money, are able to pump in money into those areas, you necessarily need to ensure that they are able to survive in the long run, that you as a state are able to pump in money into those avenues. We think that state money is meant to plug the gaps in funding, not to duplicate the private sector, so we don't think it's necessary for us to pump money into the private sector, to pump money into things like Katy Perry. Last question, why we do more good than harm to the creative scene. We think it's important for us to ensure that there's a diversity of culture within those countries, and that people stop consuming things that belong to Western canon, that belongs to a canon that belongs to Disney incorporated in those instances. We think that ultimately speaking, the more you're able to value high culture, and the more specifically you can cater to the local artists, to the local forms of art, you're able to create a more cultural discourse. Why is this good? Firstly, you're improving you're improving the likelihood of tourism that happens in those areas, because you're not able to allow local artists to be able to engage in the way that has not been able to engage before. We say that now every country will incentive to grow their own art scenes and to distinguish themselves as unique. Japan with its kabuki dance. Zimbabwe with their own integrated cultural dances. We think that's good for society. We propose.
Right, we thank the Prime Minister to respond. We invite Leader of the Opposition.
I think what's most condescending about opening government's case is the fact that they think people aren't able to decide by themselves what culture values are important to them. They think that only when culture educates, only when culture is accessible, to the high-minded, that's when it's important for us to protect. But we think the other condescending notion that they have to prove in this debate is that they think mainstream culture does not create any form of relatability or reflection upon the past. That mainstream culture is all trashy. Mainstream culture is all about mindlessness. I'm going to prove to you two things in that debate in regards to that. That one, it doesn't matter if it's mindlessness. Secondly, that not only is our side actually not mindless when we propagate mainstream art, but we're the ones that create the more democratized version of art that reflects the people's values. But before I move on towards these things, a few clarifications I feel need to be made in terms of direct rebuttals. Firstly, they said that, look, we don't want cultures to die out. I don't think side opening opposition has the onus to say that we are going to kill off Shakespeare, that we're going to kill off Tchaikovsky. We think these things can still exist within an educational framework in which people are taught these things at the end of the day. What they have to prove to us is why exactly must it flood the channels in which people choose what they themselves want to watch and what they themselves enjoy at the end of the day. But secondly, we feel that all of these notions of things like tourism and benefits, all these things, can still be improved in our side. We don't think tourism is an exclusive benefit towards things like the high art. But thirdly, if you want engagements by local artists, we think that also happens under our side. The only difference is that this local artist then would have to compete with an environment of other mainstream artists as well, which is good because that means they make that art relatable to individuals as opposed to preserving some kind of high notion of what they themselves think is important, something they don't show any normative value of in this debate. I'll integrate the rest of my rebuttals in my questions. Firstly, why exactly the subjectivity of art, why governments should not intervene in that particular facet? Firstly, is because we believe governments are not the best actors to decide what's good for people, because art is so subjective at the end of the day. It is up to your own personal experience to determine what art you should value. Right? We think these things are determined perfectly by corporations as well, because they think corporations are undemocratic. We think corporations are actually pretty democratic, considering that the way in which they cater their programs are based on what people want, right? For example, the fact that some things are more popular than the other is because of things like Nielsen ratings, because of the fact that some TV shows make more money than others. But secondly, we think social media also ensures that the popularity and demand is diverse. It's not only concluded towards some majority within a democracy, but also within the minorities as well, who voice out their concerns within the social media. These things can be reflected by those things at the end of the day, but what government is doing is that they assume a particular form of taste is more important than the other. That's why we should be pushing it into the form of a quota at the end of the day. But secondly, we think governments only have the duty to intervene within art when it actually brings harm upon people. Let's say, for example, we prevent pornography from being shown in public because minors might be influenced by it, or we prevent things like people smoking and all these depictions of art, right? All things are okay. There is no objective harm. What happens when we remove high art from that picture? So we don't think the government has an urgent onus in order to take up this particular notion at the end of the day. So all this shows that there is subjectivity of the art. Because of the subjectivity of the art, governments do not have the capacity to determine what's important for people at the end of the day. But secondly, they said, but look, what happens if this art dies out? I'm going to talk about two scenarios. Firstly, we don't think this art will die out, right? We think this art will still be preserved within intellectual environments in which people can get into at the end of the day. Environments that are much more important and much better, because at least this environment is academic, which people talk about it anyway, instead of just absorbing my art and this high art blindly from TV when they watch, and they put their own wrong interpretations of Tchaikovsky, as opposed to an educated interpretation of Tchaikovsky that's actually being taught in things like opera theaters or musical theaters or educational schools. These things can happen back here on our side at the end of the day. But secondly, we don't even care if high art dies. We think art evolves according to cultural demands, and art should be based on what people deem is functional, what people deem is truthful at the end of the day. Things like languages we should protect, in which people still speak and talk about, can still protect under our side. We love cultural preservation, but we don't think popular art should be determined by some elitist notion or government say that's not democratic upon deciding what is more important for you. If kabuki art is deemed by Japanese people as still functional, then preserve it. It still become popular at the end of the day. There's still be niche demands for it. But if it's not, why do you force people to believe that this is still functional for your particular culture? I live in an environment in Malaysia where people tell me that Malay language should be protected, but they never tell me why it's functional in society. That's really annoying at the end of the day. I think I should be able to decide that, no, I don't think if Malay genres cannot compete with Western movies, why should we preserve Saki movies at the end of the day and not allow for better horror movies to come in? We think competition about what culture creates is much better, because people don't live in a vacuum in which they believe I represent my people when they don't, because people don't like to watch their art at the end of the day, right? But secondly, I want to talk about the importance of mainstream art. Firstly, we don't care if it's mindless. Why? Because the reason why we don't care if it's mindless is because people go to school and have themselves educated by high art already. They learn about Shakespeare, they learn about Turner, all these things happen already. So when they go back home, they want to relax and unwind. Primetime TV helps them, give them that an instant form of relaxation and gratification in which they want, in which they need. You have to tell us why that form of self-actualization is not important or any less or any more inferior to other forms of actualization at the end of the day, right? But secondly, I don't believe mainstream art is all mindless. In fact, a lot of mainstream art relates to current events. Like, for example, even the creation of superhero movies talk about civil wars. Like, talk about the difference of identities between people. Within primetime TV, like Jessica Jones, even superhero movies are not absolutely mindless. We don't think about utilitarian benefits, whether morals should be Kantian or morals should be utilitarian. Even when they watch things like superhero movies at the end of the day, these things happen anyway, right? But thirdly, what happens is that we think mainstream art is important because mainstream art also happens to be very anti-establishment, but something that can create popularity the moment they are deemed relatable to people. Case in point, hip hop, right? Before I move on to talk about hip hop, just closing.
What do you